Hello, everyone. I hope your Friday is going well. My name is Alyssa Nicoll. Welcome to another Angular Air. I am so excited for our host, but before we get to him, I'm going to introduce our two panelists. Today, we have the beautiful Mike Brocchi with us. Hi, Mike.
I'm beautiful. I love it. Today's the best Friday ever.
Oh, wait, because of that, or is there like another super secret?
No, you made me feel like a pretty princess.
Okay. I was like, hey, if you got news, is there? And we also have the amazing Justin Schwartzenberger. Hello, Justin. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm finally here in the studio. Sorry about the lateness, but I'm very good now that I'm here with your beautiful faces. And let us all golf clap so we don't hurt people's ears. Our guest of honor today, Rainer Hahnekamp. How are you?
Hello. Yeah, I'm good. Fine. Thanks.
Oh,
hello
it's
everyone.
So good to see you. Oh my goodness. So tell us, Rainer, before we get into the topic of today, for those who may or may not know you, can you give a quick rundown of like how long you've been in the Angular community, what you do, what you're passionate about?
Yeah, so I am part of Angular Architects, first of all. I come from Austria. Active in the Angular community, so really active, I would say, since 2020. But I have been developing Angular a long time before. So, but becoming active is when I started to join Angular Architects, and this was kind of 2020. Okay. Yeah, so this is what I do, my daily job, more or less, consulting, workshops, and that stuff. And in terms of community work, I have this NG News channel where I bring the latest news for Angular every week. I'm also GD. And over the summer, I also joined the NGRX team as a trusted collaborator. So I'm also now there working a little bit. And yeah, today it's going to be about testing, I guess.
Awesome. So I wanted to make sure and like do a shout out for your NG News channel. How can people follow? Where are the paths for that?
Everywhere. So you can find it on LinkedIn, YouTube, X, Dev2, Medium.
Awesome.
TikTok, even there, Instagram also.
Oh, you're TikToking? How are you liking that? Is it going good? You liking it?
No, it's not going good. No.
Sorry,
no one's interested there.
Oh, excellent. So testing, tell us specifically around, because testing is such a big topic. I think I like bullied you into this episode. You have to remind me, because I think you mentioned being like really good at testing signals or having a passion for it. And I was like, I'm going to make you do it on air. So forgive me if that was the case.
No problem. I mean, we had already a testing session in spring, first half of this year. And now it's kind of specialization, I would say, how to test signals. And I hope that we can pick up of the interesting talks that we had before.
Excellent.
Especially
I
with
absolutely
Mike.
agree. And holy moly, the chat's going crazy. We got a lot of people saying Guten Morgen. Hey, Lance.
Hello, Lance.
And we've got, oh my word. I'm sorry, I won't be able to get to all of you beautiful people, but I'm going to pop up a couple who are saying hello today. Michael Smalls, Danny. Oh, it's good to see all of you. And I am so excited. So if you have questions for Rainer or for any of us, pop them in the chat. I'll get to them as I feel like they might flow, maybe, and if not, at the end. But yes, let's do it. Rainer, did you want to share a screen? I don't see a screen for you.
I have already shared my IntelliJ screen, but there is also another screen. I mean, I have just prepared one slide where it says agenda. Maybe I don't even have to share it. I just say what is there. And I think then we can just
honestly, I was going to say, if you want to verbalize the entire episode and just like, dive into what testing is like, but only verbal, I would be also down for that adventure. So
no, it's not going to happen. So we will see something, we will do something, and we will also discuss the things.
Excellent. All right. So agenda us, my good man. What are we talking about?
Yeah. So I thought that we will start very easy. So I have here two headlines: how to test signals. First one, which means how can we test the signal itself, a computed then derived value, and then the effect without a component and the effect with a component. So that's really only about the primitives, testing the primitives. And then I would like to dive into the discussion, into the question, if this is something that we should always do, like kind of this question, how do we actually test code that uses signals? How much do we have to know about the signals and that stuff? And then maybe we can have then another perspective. So the first part will be really about signals special things we have to know about them. And the second then will be more or less like generic testing stuff with signals, of course.
Beautiful. I love that.
Okay.
I was laughing at the chat. You can't go anywhere in Angular stuff without tripping over Rainer. You're everywhere, man.
Yeah, there are a lot of spaces where I'm not there, but thanks, Michael. Yeah.
Mike, do you see his screen for additions to?
I do not. You need to reshare your screen.
Yeah, do I have to reshare?
If we're sharing code, then
You got me sweating when you said you already shared it. I was like, oh, don't say it.
It was there. I'm not. It was.
It was there. Yeah. Now it's again there. So right. Yeah. Yeah, that looks familiar. Good. Okay. Good. Yeah. So if you have anything to say, then please interrupt me, and I will just do what I have prepared, and we'll see how it goes.
I think we need to get the font size a little bigger. Can you zoom in a bit?
It's a little bit bigger. I'm already in presentation mode. Yeah.
Is that possible? I know some.
It is.
Some
Yeah,
IDs.
shift, and then zoom. I think. Yeah.
Oh.
Larger, or is this okay?
Oh,
There.
that's
I think
so
that's good.
perfect.
What do you guys
Thank
think?
you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Good.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I have here, I'm using here a normal Angular CLI-based project. As you can see, I'm also using here a comma together with Jasmine. So not Jest in this case, but it doesn't really matter if you use Jest or even vtest. The tests, they will look the same. So the first thing, when it comes to the signal itself, I mean, there is not so much that you have to know on how to test them. You can actually, when it comes to signal and computed, you can actually also test them without any context of the Angular framework. So you can come up with a very simple test. So I could, for example, say here, I have a normal number where I say I'm assigning to it the value 1. I'm using here ChatGPT, so it gets a little bit faster. And if I would then say I have this textbooks example where I'm accessing my value of that particular signal and then come up with a derived one, so like here double, then everything that I have to do is that I just have to call a signal in order to get its value. So something like this. So I say here, okay, we start out with 1, we are multiplying it with 2, then the double should be, of course, 2. And if I then later would say I'm now going to set the value of n to 2, then I could expect that now the double is already 4, as it is already here suggested. So very simple, I would say. There is not something really special. A quick check. What we always should do is that we always should verify that the test is actually doing what it's supposed to do. So we also want to see it failing. So in this case, also the error message is the one that we can expect. Good.
I was going to ask about that. I'm glad you showed that. I was going to ask about that.
Yeah.
How do we make it fail first to make sure we know we got a true?
Yes. So that is always important, not just when it comes to testing signals, also not when it comes to testing Angular. You always need to distrust. You cannot trust your tests. You always want to see them fail first, then you know that they are doing the real thing.
And is that now? I've heard conflicting things. In your opinion, should you be saving the failing tests?
Saving? No. Why should you fail them? It's for the implementation part.
Yes.
So
I agree.
Yeah.
I've heard some people say that you should then make a test fail, change it to expect a fail or what have you, and leave it there.
Yeah. I mean, maybe to do something like a not or something, to put something in a test, very rarely. But this would be a test where I say, I want to verify that it is exactly not that value. But this doesn't happen so often. Usually we know the value, what we want to achieve, and this is where we are testing towards. Good. So that is very easy. I guess we all know that the signals in Angular, they come with 3 functions, not just with 2. And the third one is now the effect. And the effect is the one that causes us troubles if we want to kind of do this kind of testing approach. So if, for example, very simple, I would say here, let's say here I have a change counter. And maybe let's maybe not consider now the possibility to use your computed for it. Let's just say we have an effect for some reasons that we want to test. So the change counter is 0. And what I want to do is that I have now an effect that says every time when n changes, I want to increase the value of the change counter. So I would say here, I have an effect. I would kind of start to track my n by just calling it. And then I would say change counter plus plus. But if I do this, then that's already failing. Yeah, and it's not failing because I don't have here an assertion for the effect. It's failing because the effect is now something where we need to have some Angular environment, some Angular context available. In this case, it's the injection context. So the effect says, when you want to run me, you cannot run me outside of Angular. It really has to be inside of it. And in addition, I also need to run inside of an injection context. Mm-hmm. The reason for this is that in our case, the effect also has this automatic destroying, or it just closes itself. In our XJS, we would say we're unsubscribing. And for that, the effect is requesting the destroy ref or the injector to automatically do the unsubscription. Yeah, let's say unsubscription. There is quite an interesting story behind this, because if you might know these signals, they are becoming, or at least there is something in progress where they are starting to standardize them. So we have seen that signals are used in multiple frameworks, and all those frameworks, they kind of came together and said we want to kind of make signals part of the JavaScript language, but not all of it. The signal and the computed itself, that one will become standardized, but not the effect, because the effect is always the thing that is attached to the way how the framework works. So in Angular, it's kind of related to your injection context, also to the change detection, and that's why this part is not becoming standardized, but the rest will very likely become maybe in some years in the future. Good. Before we kind of fix this, there is something I wanted to say here about the computed, because the computed is always this kind of derived value, and it runs without Angular in this case. It's important to understand here that if I call the double in this case, that I'm dealing with a signal which is not fully reactive, as we would have it with signals that we use in a template or in an effect. So if in the double, if there would be a side effect or something, I mean, we shouldn't do this, but in the computed, if there would be a side effect, then this doesn't run automatically. It only runs because I, in my test, actively access it. I am the one who, in this case, in the test case, plays the part of the Angular framework, like kind of pulling the data. And if I don't do it, then nothing will happen. So this is important to remember. With the effect, it's different. That's why it doesn't work, because the effect says I'm the one who pulls things. So I'm the one who kind of now accesses the value from n, but I only work in Angular. So what do we have to do? Well, we could now say we want to come up here now with a service. So I could say, okay, if I want to test now an effect, then, and this is usually always the case, then I need to come up with an Angular service. So in this case, I would say I have a change counter service. Let me quickly remove that. And then I could have here the same things again. So I could say here, well, I have here signal 1. Then I have here my double, where I say it's this computed. And then we can now come up with the change counter. And what I usually do, if I use an effect, that I always try to not to put it into a constructor, but always to do it outside of a constructor, to assign it to a property. So in this case, I would say n-change counter or n-change effect. Why do I do it? Because now I'm forced to provide a name for the effect. So I need to say what this is actually going to do. So it's a little bit easier to understand compared to when it's just is in the constructor and we're just calling a function. Yeah, in this case, this is what I want to do. So I say, okay, whenever n is now changing, I want to increase my change counter, and we start with 0. So this is now a way how I can test this thing. What I have to do now, though, is that I have to do now some certain changes, because I need to use now the testbed. So I need to now kind of find a way how to introduce this injection context, and this only goes via the testbed. So at least to me, there is not really another very useful way. So we can say here configure testing module, but in our case, it's just about injecting a service which is already provided in root. So for me here, it's enough if I just say I want to get an instance of this change counter service. So change counter in this case. The signal of n is already defined. Actually, all of it is already defined. So I can remove all this. And now I can say, okay, let me quickly remove all of it and just run the test just to see if it's still working. Yeah, so if the test is still working. And then I would say, okay, I would now expect that from my change counter, we can first access the double, say that should be number 2. Yeah, that's true. And then the next part is already the change counter, where we would now say, yes, change counter now has to be 1. Because n is there, we know n effect always runs at least once, and then every time that in this case the n changes. So double has already number 2, change counter now also has to have run at least once, so the value should be 1. Well, and if I run this test, then we see it's not working because of the effect, obviously. Now careful. If you are now in doubt and you try to experiment with some stuff, you could say, well, that's because maybe the n requires a certain change. So I can't just use the n without changing it. So I could say, okay, I want to change the n to 2, for example. Now then the change counter should be executed. So I rerun it again. It's still not working. It still says here, change counter is 0. We can say, okay, maybe there is also then some issue with the double, because the double should now be 4. And if it's 4, then we know that this kind of reactivity should actually work. We can try it again. And it's not working. And again, the reason is the effect again. The effect, as I said before, is its own reactive context. And whereas with the computed, where we can access a signal, the effect works differently. The effect is doing the access to the signals, but the effect always runs with a certain scheduler, and that scheduler in Angular is bound to the change detection in this case. The effect is going to change. We will see when it will run in the future, but for now we can say it is bound to the change detection. That one will include the effect as well. And what is also important, and I have now forgotten it. Yeah, so was not so important then. So the effect is pulling the value out of it. The problem now is we don't have here change detection. So for some reason, I decided that I say I want to write a test for maybe just a service. There is nothing visual thing there. I could now wrap it into a component, but maybe I don't want to do this. So what we have now, and we have that since Angular 17, we have a testing method which would trigger the effect. So we can say, I don't care when Angular would trigger the effect, I am now doing it on my own. I'm now doing it in my test. And the command for that is flushEffects. So if I would say here, maybe at the very beginning, testbed, I want to flush the effects, then this means that now, maybe I can also move here this assertion to the very top. This means now flushEffects, if an effect needs to run, then run it now. And this is now also important, it runs synchronously. This is a huge difference to what we have normally in a real application, where we know that the effect is always running asynchronously. Here with the test, we say, no, just run it synchronously, run it with flushEffects. So if I save it now and rerun my tests, then we see all of a sudden they are working. But you have to be careful. You have to flush the tests, or you have to flush the effects every time you think that now the effect has to run. Because if I would say here, okay, we have now changed the end, we have changed it now to 2, which means that the change counter should now also be 2, then it's still not working, because the flush effect only flushes it once, but not twice. And that's why in this case, the change counter has still the value 2. Unless, of course, I say, okay, no, flush it here as well. And then hopefully now it has the value number 2, as we see. And again, careful, flush effects does not mean run the effect. Flush effects means effect if one of your tracked signals have changed, now run. So there is still an option that we say flush effects, but the effect doesn't do anything. And we can also verify this. So if we have here already this kind of very, how should I say, narrowed test where we are only going towards the signals, so we're very down to the signals, then we can also test this. For example, I could say, okay, I'm now running again flush effects, and I want to verify that in this case, the counter is not 3. It should be 2 because the n has not changed. Yeah, that is important. So what I could expect now that if I run now this test, that it's going to fail, and it's going to fail with the error message saying the change counter is still 2 and not 3. So I run it, yeah, and it's failing. So it says here expected 2 to be 3. So that's the way how it is with the flush effect.
So my only concern with this, and I fully understand how it's working and why it's working. My concern is that now the way that change counter works needs to be, or if you're testing that, you need to be aware of the implementation detail that it is being done using an effect to be able to test it effectively. So the idea of coding something in isolation and to isolate logic is now almost gone, because you need to know that an effect is being implemented to be able to test it the way you are.
Yes. So you need to know that the effect is in place, that someone is using the effect. It's not about the way how the effect works, but you have to know that there is an effect and that you have to kind of trigger it. Again, it's not really like triggering. It's kind of like going to the effect and say, maybe now it's time that you want to run if you think you have to. So it's more like this. It's very similar to what we have with component tests when we need to run the change detection manually. Also, that one does not run automatically. It's the same with effects in this case.
Is there any penalty that you've noticed using testbed.flushEffects that would cause any performance issues? So I'm thinking if you do a whole bunch of setup and you want to do your expects, that maybe just calling testbed.flushEffects, if there's the possibility that effects are in place, to be able to just call it and then run your expectations.
Yeah, like can you overuse it or use it?
I don't think so.
No.
Honestly, I mean, there are always, of course, I mean, it depends on which kind of degree we are talking here about. But if we, for example, say we have a huge effect, so if I run it, that really takes a long time, then we are safe, because as you have seen, if I say flush effect and none of the signals have been changed, then the effect says, yeah, but I don't need to run, although you think I should run because nothing has changed. So we are very safe in that. What could happen, though, is that you miss one. That you maybe have a certain testing scenario where in real life, the effect runs multiple times, but you missed this because you didn't run the flush effect in the middle or somewhere. This could happen. But in terms of performance, honestly, I don't see really an issue there.
Okay. I'm thinking not so much of, hey, I'm creating a service and I need to test my service. I'm thinking more so from the scenario of, hey, I'm consuming some third-party library, somebody else, somewhere else in my organization has created, and I need to be able to verify what I'm working with is working, or what I'm trying to utilize is working. Then that's when you can run into essentially the service being a black box to you.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't care about this. Just run flush effects. If you are not sure, you have to guarantee that it's only run if it's really must.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So if I ask my kid a question and I don't get the answer I want, maybe call flushEffects to get the answer I want out of them.
Kind of, yeah. As we do with component fixture detect changes all the time. Yeah.
But if they don't have the answer for you, you can keep flushing all the way, and it's still going to be 2 instead
I was
of
gonna
3.
say, yeah, because it's not run effect, right? Like you can't
Yeah.
force it.
Can't force it, right?
Yes. You just say, if you want, now it's the time to do it. And
They
if not,
still have
then
the power,
totally fine.
Mike. They still have the power.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're right.
Michael, I think called you out, Mike, because you used effectively when you were talking about effects. So I just wanted you to know that they're catching everything you're throwing out. So
Great. Okay. Yeah, so in general, about this kind of testing style that we are doing here, in an application context, I think that this is something which you might not use. I mean, testbed flush effects, yes, but now you want to test a little bit more than just single pieces of a signal or so. What you're doing here, or what we have done here, is something that we usually do on a library level. So for example, in the signal store, we have these kind of tests where we really work with a test bed, but we don't have a component, and we have to verify that effects are not executed multiple times and that stuff. This is where you need this. Usually you go with it just by injecting maybe just really the service, or maybe doing it via the component, and then also kind of delegating it to the change detection to the component itself. Because as soon as you use the component and you're using the DOM, then you don't have here any issue. So if you say then, for example, flush effects, that is not necessary anymore, because now Angular is taking care for you. And we can also do this. So in the very early stages in Angular 16, where the flush effects was not available, we actually had to do this. We had to write our own wrapper component just for a service in order to get these effects running. So what you have to do in this case is that you say, okay, I have here just a component. I can remove the selector, and I say, okay, I have some kind of a wrapper component. That's it. And this wrapper component will now use my counter service. And I say here, inject change counter service. Just want to make sure that this thing is then really working as it's supposed to. And then I can say here, okay, now I need to feed it somehow with maybe here with an N or whatever. So in this case, I would say, okay, I have here some kind of a signal. Let's say here N. And this signal is now, in this case, it's an input. So the input allows me now to kind of set the value from the outside very easily. And now I say it's a required input, and it should be, in this case, of type number. No. New keyboard. So I'm not hitting the keys as I want. Right. And then the counter service in this case here is public. And then in that sense, I could now here come up and could say, okay, what do I want to do? I maybe kind of want to provide now a function where I say, you give me your signal and I'm going then to process it. So what we, for example, could do then in our counter service, that we say, okay, I kind of track N or track signal. And then here I would say, you give me some kind of a signal of type number. And then I start here with an effect, and I'm doing then whatever this is going to do, changing the double or something else. I don't want to continue here. This was just kind of a way to get to our real example. I have already prepared an existing service which is doing that. And for that, let me remove all that stuff again. I mean, we can leave the counter service. But what I have prepared here a edit customer component. So this is now a component which makes already heavy usage of the signals. So we see here it also has already this input required. In this case, the input required comes from the route, which is, I would say, so far so good. And it is using here the customer store, as you see. So this is now a service. And if we take a look at this service, we see, it is providing here signals of countries. It also has here a signal of a customer. And this is now where the interesting part starts. because this is here a signal which could be customer undefined because we still have to fetch the data. I would say this is a very common use case, what we have here. So we have a component where we are getting from the route the ID, and then I have to load the data. That's something which happens all the time, I would say. And the way how it works in this case is that, again, I have outsourced all the kind of logic to my service. It's actually on a component level. That's why the service here is provided as well. And what my component is doing, it says to my service, here is the signal you want to have. It's not the value of the signal, it's the real signal, it's the ID. Please do with it whatever you think is necessary, kind of running an effect on it. Do the fetching of the data. And what I want to have from you is that in the end, I would expect that you give me back the countries and the customer as well. This is what this component here is expecting. The component is then passing it on to its presentational component, but that's not so important right now. The service, the customer store in this case, says, okay, load customer, I'm getting the signal, I'm running then an effect. Also a little bit of an explanation what's going on here. We use here the normal tracking part. So I say I'm only interested in the ID. And then we are calling here the customer service. So we are calling here obviously an asynchronous task. Could also be an observable, doesn't matter in this case. Here it's a promise which is returned. But in the end, someone else is now continuing doing the request and is giving us back the customer, which we then in the end set to this signal. And I'm using here the untracked because I don't know what my customer service is doing in by ID. If there is some internal signal included in the customer service, then I don't want that these internal signals are part of the tracked signals what this effect here is doing. So this is this kind of explicit effect pattern, which I think is very important. So far, so good. Because what we want to do now is that we want to test the whole thing. So I say I want to maybe not deal with the country signals or the customer signals. What I want to do is that I say, yes, customer store, good. But in the end, the customer store is only used here in my, not here, but here in my edit customer component. And I want to verify when, of course, I'm going to kind of mock now my HTTP request and all that stuff. But I want to verify that somehow the real customer shows up in the end. So I'm investigating a lot of time and amount, maybe in just a single test, which also includes a lot of signals. But in the end, the coverage of it is not just the service, but a little bit more. And this is what we discussed last time. Mike, if you remember where I said maybe this kind of testing style, maybe try to move away a little bit from only a class, try to go a little bit more abstract. This is what I'm kind of proposing here.
Yeah, this is more of like an integration test than a true.
Exactly. Over the summer, things have also changed a little bit in terms of testing approaches.
What?
I have now an official confirmation from the Angular team, from Jeremy Elborn. There was a Q&A session where he said he wants to do now, in the whole session, he only wants to talk about how to testing in the right way. Mm. And what he said, when it comes to testing, we should try to be as close to the real user perspective, to the real user perspective, as it is practical. So not kind of making it too complicated. If it's necessary, then we still, of course, have to mock certain things. But if it's possible, and in this case it is, kind of test the edit customer component together with its service.
I mean, I really struggle whenever someone then adds the, when practical. Like, do you in your heart, when it's practical to keep going? Like,
no, I mean, you have some kind of a feeling, I would say, where you would say, if you see a certain code, then you would say, but this can't be it. So this must be wrong. Something is not right there. Kind of a gut feeling or so. This is how I usually do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
You always need to look and you need to say, okay, is this understandable for everyone? Is it really worth the effort?
Right.
Is it readable also for me in half a year? So kind of that stuff.
There's also the argument when you're talking about testing of what is a unit. And
Yeah.
I know a lot of times the idea of a unit is a single file or a single function or a single class. But here between the three, the component, the store, and the service are almost functioning as an individual unit. So in a way, it still could be considered a unit test. It all depends upon your definition of a unit.
Oh, that's true, Mike. I like that.
Yeah. I mean, in this case, you could also say, okay, let's try it with the integration test first, and let's see what's missing in the end. And in this case, I can already tell you nothing will be missing because it's just straightforward. So there is not really like if conditions where I say in the service there is a lot of logic. It's just give me the signal, I'm doing the request, I give you back the data, and that's it. There is not more that I will do.
So Alyssa, I got the sense like earlier when we were looking at the flush effect, that kind of, I started thinking like, well, how does that equate to how I'm actually going to use this thing, right? And when we talk about like, well, the components doing change detection, that started thinking to me like, oh, that makes sense from a consumption standpoint. That's kind of what I care about. This flush effect is like, if I looked at this 3 months from now, it's like, well, what am I really, testing? Because this is not really at the Angular component level, I'm not calling flush effect. Right. So I think
exactly
that keys me into like, oh well, yeah.
How to get so the idea here is that as we said earlier, I might not have to know that I'm using an effect under the hood. I could still use an observable. I don't want to change my test because of it. What I'm only concerned about is that first of all, maybe an HTTP request goes out, so somebody needs to send that one. And of course, in the DOM, sometime maybe a customer should show up that I have just loaded. So something like this.
Yeah, it's a very dumb component in that it is essentially you give me something, I'm going to show it.
Yeah.
And I really like the whole implementation there. And then the store is almost like the translation layer between the logic and the data that's going to be presented.
Yes. And it even goes also a little bit further. I mean, I said before, it's also, everything is very simple here, but before I start with the test, we can also check out the UI component, this app customer that I have here.
Oh, yes.
For example, if I open that one, then we see it's also making use quite a lot of signals. So we have here the input required of customer countries. We have a form group. So in the end, this is a form component in the end, where we have ID, first name, name, and so on and so forth. And it's also using here an effect. So it says, whenever the input changes, then obviously my parent component told me that maybe some data has changed, obviously, and then I have to synchronize my form again. And the only way I can do it is that I only use here the effect, unless we don't have signal support from forms. And that's why I say here, this form group set value. And I don't even want to know this. What I'm maybe just interested is that in the end, if the HTTP request is answered, that everything that I want to see or actually have is that those input fields that I have here, that they have the right values. This is what I'm concerned. This is what's important to me. This is what I want to test.
Is that not like dangerous to like only test that thing? Because then if it fails, you have like no trail of like which part failed, right? Like
yes, this is one of the risks or downsides when it comes to integration unit tests. If we compare these two together, where we say integration tests, if they fail because they cover so much, it's usually very hard to find out where the error is, because then you need to go down to the files. On the other side, what you also have to consider is what's more worth, because very often we don't have time to write all the tests we want.
Right. Yeah.
What is more worth? Do I maybe want to know if the whole thing works? And if it's not working, then of course I need to go and find the bug. Or do you say, well, I'm just interested if the tiny bits work. Maybe I have to write much more unit tests, which are again, then maybe in terms of maintainability, it takes a little bit more. And I never have this kind of feeling that my complete edit customer feature is fully tested, but only the single parts of it.
I love how you put that though. And I love how you explained weighing that, because you're right. The maintainability of all of those small tests would be a lot, even though, and it's saving what? Like the developer, the convenience of hunting down the deeper bug. Like I love
Yes.
how you put that, Rainer.
Yeah, I hope that we don't have all the time a new bug in the component. So that's why I would say the priority is actually at the integration test. I want to know that the service plays together with my container component and with the presentational component. This is what I'm interested in.
Okay.
And also, I mean, we always forget this when it comes to the discussion.
What?
The maintainability. How often do I have to change that test? Before I continue, we already short on time, so maybe I'm not going to implement it now live, but I'm just going to show you the solution, and then I can maybe tell you what I mean. Because very often the thing is, do I want to change my test because I have changed a little bit in the implementation detail? Do I, for example, really have to change something because in Angular 19, we have now received maybe a new function for the signals? I mean, we are hearing some kind of rumors that Alex Riccapo said, yeah, there is this reset pattern. Maybe there is a new utility function coming out. But in the end of the day, even in Angular 19, I would say, yeah, whatever function I'm using internally, it doesn't matter. In the end, I still want to have the input fields for first name, last name. They should still have their values. And if you now use a new function or something else, I don't care. The end result must be the same. And if I have an integration test that says I'm on a so high level that I don't even know what's going on under the hood, that you're using effect or something else, then it's the best thing. Because as soon as you know what you're using, you also need to change your test again, your unit test again. And this is not what you want. Whenever you change a unit test or whenever you change a test, this is a warning symbol, because you don't cover it anymore. You have not changed the test itself. Who says that you are not introduced a new error in this test? This could also happen.
I love that.
That's why end-to-end tests are so good. But yeah, that's a different topic. So I would say let's quickly jump to the solution branch. So very
show us. How are you going to
Yes.
make sure these form fields have what they need?
Exactly.
I'm so excited.
So this is here our final spec. This is the final test, what we have here. It would have taken a little bit of a longer time to come up, but it's explained, I guess, in the last 10 minutes very easily. So what do I do here? I have my customer. So the create customer is a helper function. It's not so important. It just creates me a customer that I need for my HTTP request, obviously. Then we have here our testbed configuration. I say I want to import the edit customer component. This is the one that I want to test. I don't want to deal with change detection. This is also important. So this is a feature which most of us don't know, but there is a possibility that I can say, my dear testbed, you now run the change detection automatically, which also means you also run now the effects, the scheduler of the effect also automatically. I don't want to care about it. There are some conditions behind it that it always works. We always need to go via the DOM because we need to kind of trigger DOM events. But as long as we stick to that, the change detection runs automatically. Then there are some other things to provide native data adapter, the noob animation. These are dependencies, services, global services that Angular material requires. So that's why we have them here. This is part of the UI component. Here, I'm using the built-in Angular tools for mocking, faking, however you want to call it, the HTTP client service. So I'm already saying, I don't know how many services this kind of request needs to go through. In the end, there will be an HTTP client instance which is requesting some data. And this is where I step in when it comes to the mocking part. Then it goes even further. I say, well, there is this input ID required, if you remember, where the ID is coming from the router. Now, do I now want to start to mock the router as well? Or do I maybe want to, again, say, yeah, maybe there is an option where I can use as much of the router in a testing environment as possible so that I don't need to mock this kind of input or the router service or the activated route service. So I just want to maybe try to use the things that are already working in Angular here as well. This is again, it's kind of this tendency to test as much as practical, or as long as it is practical. And provide router is something I can use here because we have also a very similar testing utility from Angular, like the HTTP client. So I can configure here, I can register my component, I can attach it to a route, which has a component, which has a router parameter, namely the ID. And I can then really verify that there are no maybe too early accesses to my signals when the values are not set, but that it really works as it works in real life. Good. And then this here is my test. This is everything. I don't have to do so much. That's the beauty of it. I'm injecting my testing controller. That's the first part, because I need to manage my HTTP communication. And then comes the harness. So here, this routing utility, which is the same, very similar to the testing controller. And now I say, I want to navigate to a route which has customer/ID. Of course, my routing configuration needs to match. And then the component is activated by my routing system, by my testing routing system. It gets the one, hopefully, via the input. And then I say, if everything works according to the plan, then in the background, this ID signal, let me quickly go back to our component. Then this ID signal here, which comes directly from the router, is passed on here to this load customer. The load customer is now doing the effect. Then it calls the customer service and so on. I actually don't want to know all that stuff, what's really happening. I just want to say, whenever this request goes out for customer 1, you are going to answer it. Where am I? Here with my customer. You're flushing the customer. This is everything that I want to do. I don't care how you do it explicitly or specifically. And then we have here something, which doesn't look so nice. But I hope this will be improved in the future versions of Angular. But I have to call here when stable 2 times. What's when stable? When stable is the recommended approach to deal with asynchronous tasks. So we know there is a promise included, there is an effect included, which now really runs asynchronously. And it's the recommended one since Angular 18, I think. They changed it, and there is on YouTube. There is also another video. Don't remember the name, but from the Angular team, where they have introduced this a little bit and said the when stable is something which also works zoneless. It knows about the asynchronous tasks, and it will tell you when all these asynchronous tasks have finished and when you can continue.
And the double is why again? What did you?
The double is necessary because I am getting back the request. The request is then processed via the effect, which means we have already an asynchronous task which triggers another one. And in this case, the when stable is necessary 2 times. This would not have happened if you use the old fake async with the tick or with the flush. They will take care of it. There it just works. But the problem is with the old ones, with fake async, they depend on Zone.js. Mm-hmm. And as we know, the future with Zone.js, we are not really sure what will happen to these testing utilities. So at the moment when you want to use something which is future safe or also for zoneless, then the when stable is the one that you should use.
That makes sense.
I still don't know what will happen with fake async, because there will be some use cases where I say, look, there is some kind of timeout. It runs maybe 5 seconds. I can't use when stable here. Maybe when stable will then block for 5 seconds, but I want to use my tick with 5,000 because I want to execute this asynchronous task right now. So I think that in the future, we will get another testing utility, which also works zoneless. But at the moment, I mean, that's the one that I would use if it works. Let's put it like this.
Like, do you have any rumors on when such a utility might exist?
No,
Okay,
unfortunately not.
Cool.
This is something on my to-do list that I want to ask.
Excellent.
Yeah. No, there were some things like questions, who's using fake async and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And actually at NGRX, so I've written the testing guide. And in the beginning, the first draft was using when stable all the time. And we had those issues with the timeouts. And then my colleague said, no, we are going to use the fake async also in the testing guide, or the wait for async, because we don't think that the Angular team just can say we are going to deprecate fake async and then all of a sudden we can only use when stable.
Yeah.
This will not work. So something will come in the future. And maybe if it's just like the fake async has a certain zoneless mode where it still works, we don't know. But something has to come, I would say.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and the when stable also has the nice side effect in this case that the change detection also runs. So I don't have to care about the effects. They are running already, including also the change detection itself, also the asynchronous tasks. And that's why I don't have so much code here. It's just very simple. And then I can just say, okay, I am going to search on my page here somewhere. There should be a DOM element which has the data test ID attribute set to input first name. So these are the special marker, the attributes that I've set in my UI component. Let me quickly check that we see where this is coming from. So that's here. That's just a simple HTML attribute, just having a selector for the tests. And I say, I want to have access to the native element. This is a synchronous call, as we see here, because it should already be rendered. I don't want to wait for anything. Everything has already to be executed. And then I say, well, and in the end, the input, the value of this input has to be here, in this case, John, because this is what I have defined in the very beginning. This is the customer that I've created. This is the customer that my HTTP request has returned. And then this is what actually should show up in my UI component. And if I would now run the code coverage, we would see almost 100% for the container component, the service, and the UI component. And again, if I now say, okay, I don't like signals, I'm going to switch back to observables, or I'm using one of the new or maybe upcoming utility functions, I don't have to touch my test. That one will still give me the guarantee that my feature works as expected. So this is the question that we always have to ask: how deep do we want to go? And as you have seen, signal computed, that's a no-brainer, which is very easy to test. We don't even need to use Angular for that. Effects are tricky because we need to say flush effects. But if we find, or if we say, yeah, nice, but maybe I don't want to even know so much in detail what's going on, I want to test on a higher level, then this kind of approach, using all the utilities, all the tools that the Angular framework gives us, like the router testing harness or the HTTP controller, that's really good. That's really nice, I would say.
There was a question from John saying, just opening a can of worms, why not just mock HTTP client instead of going through the drag of using HTTP testing controller?
Yes. So I used here the testing controller because this is the one where I would expect most are familiar with. Honestly speaking, in my own tests, I also use very often my own mock. Because what the testing controller does not do for me is that the flush runs asynchronously. And sometimes I want that in my test when I have an observable. I don't want that my observable is emitting values synchronously, but asynchronously, as it is in real life. And the controller doesn't do that.
Love it.
I really like how clean this is.
Me too. I'm like, ooh, it's sharp, man. And I love the thought process that you've put into it. It's very clean.
Yeah. As I said, thank you. I mean, in the end, it's really about how deep do you want to go in your test. It always depends, of course, on the application. The more logic you have, the deeper you have to go. The fewer logic, maybe the higher you can go.
I think it's often overlooked how much of an improvement the binding router parameters to inputs, how big that change was for simplicity of wiring up your components.
Yeah.
The one thing that I'm still kind of hesitant about it, I'm not hesitant about using it, but is that if I go back and I look at that component like 2 months from now, it's not always clear that I'm getting that from the route, right? And I think you could argue one way or the other, like maybe I don't need to know that at the component, but I think at some level it's like, oh, well, this thing is coming from, a query param or a route. It's helpful to know that when you're working on that component. So I don't know what that story is like, I'm trying to feel that out.
Yeah. So you say you don't even want to know where it's coming from, the ID or...
No, I do. I want to know that, like, if I go back, if somebody's going to work on this component, right? And it's like, it's a route binding, right? And it's happening from the route. It's kind of hard to discover that we're digesting a route param or a query param, because all it is an input signal, right?
Yes.
And it's actually like the application configuration for routing saying bind that is where the answer is of the fact that could be coming from the URL, right?
Yes, I mean, the test shows it very obviously, I would say, but because here we have, of course, the router testing harness and that stuff, but the implementation maybe not. Because in the implementation, you only see the ID input and that's it.
Yeah, so like if I didn't have a test, right, that describes, because that's the other benefit. It's a great point, because like having tests in your code also explain how to use your code. And it kind of gives you key. Like you don't have to understand I have to run the app to see it. The test can kind of tell that story. So the test helps to explain that, like you said right here. But like if we were to look at that component, that customer component, right? And we see that input for that value for ID, just looking at that component, it's not really clear that we're going to be receiving that ID from the route, right?
I understand what you're saying, Justin, and I partially agree. However, if you look at this component as, hey, it's an isolated component, it does some customer edit stuff, right? And all I know is that it has an input because it has that property defined as an input signal, right? It doesn't matter where it's coming from until you were worried about where in the application it's coming from. It may be a component inside that's nested inside of another component that has an input that's being passed into it.
That's what you mean. Okay.
So here's the challenge. If I made this component, right, and I say it's got an ID, do you have the ID one? The one that digests the ID?
Yeah. Where do I have it? Here. Right? This is the
one
where
right?
the ID comes in.
So if I have this component and I want to reuse it, I tell my team, use this component in this different app, right? And they go and they use it. They have to understand that, like, they have to set up the router to,
they don't
use in parameters.
They don't, because they can put this edit customer component inside of another component and just specify an ID property, which is defined right there.
You can tell them to use it that way, but like the intent right here, like we built this component with the kind of notion that it's going to be used in an application that does input binding from routes, right? So there's a requirement to effectively use this in that concept, that if I want the ID to be coming from the route, I need to know that not only do I use this component in my app, but I also have to make sure my app is configured, the route configuration is to pass the parameters around. See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. You want to have some special marking, maybe there is unfortunately not really an input from route function where I immediately see it.
Right, see it. Yeah, it's a cognitive overload of like, how do I read it and just, I get it. I want to use that from a route param, right? Yeah. Just some indicator from a human readable standpoint of understanding that that's what's in play here. That's how it's working completely, right?
Yeah, it's the same thing that Michael said of, I wish that you could pass in a param to input like from route.
I disagree.
I
truly do. I mean, the idea is the component is there to be rendered wherever somebody wants to render it. And if they want to render it as part of a router outlet and pass in the input through a route parameter, then so be it. If they want to route to, or if they want to drop this somewhere internally within somewhere else within their application to use it directly, fine. That's the idea of the portability of the components.
But like, couldn't
I agree
you?
That, like, it doesn't need something specific to say, oh, this is from the route. But from a usable standpoint, like to understand that like the intent here is that it's there. It's like a helper to the user, to the developer, right? Not so much of a code parsing syntax thing, right?
I would argue that maybe the test can help you here a little bit more when it comes to marking, because I show in the test how the component is supposed to be used. I say, hey, look, there is a router included, and that's the way how it is supposed to be. Of course, it's not perfect. I mean, I would also kind of, because maybe I say the edit customer component is not meant to be shared. It's a feature component bound to that particular URL. And then maybe this information is missing here.
But that's the power of the test, is that it becomes documentation for
Yes.
usage,
Yes.
right? Because if you go to the test, you see that to set this up to work for the route, in the test, you see that you have to configure your route for route parameters, right? And so the test becomes your documentation that humans can read and understand. If I'm going to use it in this case, this is what I need to do. So that's the fit, right, of the answer, right?
The documentation could be line 18, could read / from route.
Yeah, that's it, right?
Yes.
Hot dog, Mike.
I mean,
No, he's right.
I mean,
he's right.
we talk about self-documenting code, and while I agree with that, sometimes some code deserves some comment. So maybe that's the right place to say, hey, just so you know, when you're looking at this, the idea is that this is coming from the route.
Yeah.
Or maybe that the input gets an additional property where it says, hey, look, it can only be activated or set by the route. But that again, then we would bind this input function with the router. I am 100% sure that this would never go through.
And I bring this up because, like, if somebody on a team goes and uses this component and then they run the app, like, there's no clear, it's not going to hard fail, right? That they didn't set up their route binding to be the ID. So now they're spending time. They're asking me a question. Hey, how does this need to do? We're wasting a lot of time where maybe we could have articulated that in the beginning. You know, and so the test is a great example. If we had a test, then it's the instructions. They can just look at the test and get that answer, that sort of thing. Yep.
I wonder though, do you guys find it to be true, like how Michael said, where it says that most of like his routed components are smart components that use the route info like in a switch map, and they're tightly bound to routing anyways? Like, do you guys find like people just slipping in like, oh, in a route param, like, or is it just like the pattern for that application? I feel like it would be one or the other. Like,
I think we're breaking new ground, right? I think it depends. If somebody's coming in fresh, and input and signals are their world from the jump, then cool. But if you're talking about legacy, where you're just now adopting signals, you're just now learning this, you have a different pattern for route parameters in the past, and now you're like migrating to this. Like, how do you get people educated and adopting it and still move your velocity of writing new code, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We got to add in an addition to that old house, right? And we're like,
where's the bathroom? How do you use it? Yeah, something different, right? It's got a bidet. Now what do I do?
You just back away slowly, man. You just back away slowly.
Flush. I mean, I figured.
In the past, I think I always used not the route as it was supposed to, because as you know, the old one that always gives you back an observable of the parameters. And very often I said, I don't need the observable. I don't want to subscribe. I just want to have the value. So I use the snapshot. But now it doesn't matter. It's just a signal. I'm using signal everywhere. It's reactive. And I'm getting the same kind of experience from an observable, or careful when comparing signals with observables. But I hope you know what I mean. I'm getting this reactivity in case the route parameter does get changed. I'm prepared for it because I use signals.
I love it. Also, Michael, that's my house too. I have no grounding blocks. It's bad. It's real bad. We got to redo it. But I love Rainer. This was such a cool episode and like so well taught. Not
Thank
just
you.
thought out, but like the execution of how you taught us. Like 10 out of 10. Would Rainer again? Absolutely.
I had the solution branch ready. That was the key.
What'd you
is
say,
this
Mike?
code available if anybody wanted to go take a look at the pattern and play with it?
Yes, of course. Yeah. It's already available, but I can then also send it to you, and then you can just post
I can put it in the comments too, or the description. Oh, thank you. Ilir said, Rainer, will the new effect scheduling have impact on how tests have been written and shown to us here now?
Wait a second.
The new effect scheduling.
I don't know. The effect is still in developer preview for a certain reason, as far as we know, because the time when it runs, I mean, it will run asynchronously. That I think is something which is fixed, that will not change. but there are some subtle differences, like with the other asynchronous tasks, which might also run. We really have to wait until 19, or maybe really until the effect becomes stable. Then I would say then they have made their decision when exactly the effect runs, and then maybe some tests which might, I would say, have heavy dependency to the DOM manipulation, but I think it's just a minority. I would say I would not expect that the majority of your tests, if actually any of the tests, will have an issue with these things.
Nice.
I mean, of course, given that you already use now the effect. So if we are talking here about switching from an observable from a full RxJS-based application, then it's something else. Because in RxJS, if you have, of course, observables, you don't have the guarantee that the values are emitted asynchronously. It could also happen that they were executed synchronously, like the HTTP client, but with an effect. So the HTTP, the testing control of the HTTP client, but with the effect, you have the guarantee that it will always be executed asynchronously. So there are some things which might change because of that.
Also, Mohammed was saying how they love NGRX Signal Store. So
thanks. I will pass it on.
Yes, absolutely. I am definitely behind Ilya on this. Thank you, Rainer. It was beautiful. Oh, I love it. I will, as soon as I have the link to the code, I'll put that.
Yeah, if you wait a few seconds, then you have it. I can post it into the chat.
Excellent. Can we put links in the YouTube chat, fam? I can't remember.
I can give the link in the private chat. Now you have it.
Yeah, I think we have
now
to,
you can
we have
do
to post
with
it.
Gotcha. Okay. And then John was saying, I think I missed how to create signals in a mocked service. Grabbing this.
Rewind the video.
Rewind. You got this, man. Where it'll be up in like 2 shakes. Okay, here is. It's going through. Thank you, darling. And I'll show it here. Not that anyone at home is going to want to type that bad boy out.
No, it's a link. You can click on it.
Yeah, I will make it clickable in the description. Yeah. But I wanted to ask, outside of coding, inside of coding, Rainer, do you have anything that you want to highlight? And boys, be thinking of your picks as well. Anything that you want to give a shout out to?
I mean, last time I think I mentioned that I'm watching Dragon Ball. If this is what you're,
did you finish? I
finished it. Yeah. Now I'm watching Lost and Prison Break. They have the tendency to be very long.
Is this your first watch through of Lost? Like the first time you've?
I'm not sure yet. Somebody told me that there was a 6 kind of part of it, and I think I've missed that. So I always had the impression of a certain ending, which was not true. And this is what I want to find out now. We will see. We will see.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I feel like we have very similar brains in that aspect. There's a lot of times I'm like, I was on a overseas flight and I was rewatching a show, but I didn't realize it was a rewatch until the last episode. And I was like, I've seen all of this. There was. What was that? Do you watch auf English oder auf Deutsch?
English. I always try to watch it in English just to practice my English, obviously. Yeah.
Oh, that's so exhausting, though. You gotta give your brain a break at some point. Do you get headaches from like?
No.
Okay,
at some point in time, you're getting used to it, and then sometimes I don't even know if I have now watched it in English or in German.
That's such a flex. I love it.
It's nice.
All right, Mike, Justin, you guys got any picks for this week? Anything you want to shout out to?
Mono Repo World's early next week. So if you are going to be in the Mountain View area, try to check it out. Should be lots of fun.
I think me, Mike,
I'll be there.
Justin, Rainer, are you going to be there?
No. I'm in Germany. We have NGD, so the German Angular conference.
I was telling one of your cohorts that I was jelly I was missing it because I saw some of the. It looks so good. I hope you have a blast, man. Excellent. Okay, so Mono Repo World, we're gonna be there. Justin, you got anything you want to highlight?
Yeah, a little late to the party, but I'm finally playing Baldur's Gate 3. And so my buddy and I made dwarf bards. So we're making a band. So any of our other party members that we put in there, we have to make them have to perform skills so that we all can play instruments, and we just pretty much roll up into any.
I was gonna say, don't you
scenario,
feel
just
a
start playing
little?
music? It's great.
Don't you feel a little like weighted towards one side of the skill set tree? Like if everyone has to play an instrument.
I mean, that's what we got to deal with. That can't break the band up, right? So that's the rules. We're just gonna try to play through the entire thing.
Oh, excellent! All right, no spoilers, but I want to hear how your campaign ends. I'm very curious on some of the decisions.
Going good so far. They actually made the
make.
bard skills like powerful from the start, so we're actually being effective. My buddy's already played it through once, and so he keeps going like, I never imagined that we could go through this part without fighting. Like, here you go. So it's pretty cool.
Michael with the puns today. I love it.
Depends on what we roll.
Yeah, he's like, you're either band or band, right? Like you're one or the other. Oh, okay. I think I had something and I totally forgot it. It just lost to me. But I do hope to see you all at either. I actually have been running into some Angular Air peeps like at conferences. So come hang out with us. The entire Angular Air crew will be at Monorepo World. So if you're anywhere nearby, we want to see you. So I think that's all. Thank you again, Rainer. 1,000 Dankeschön.
Thanks for having me.
All right. I think that is a wrap. We're going to hear from our sponsors and then we'll see you next time, everybody. Bye.
Goodbye.
I love that wave, Mike. That was beautiful.
Princess, baby.
It was mwah. Angular Air is sponsored by Kendo UI for Angular. We have over 100 components built from the ground up in Angular or each framework and library that it's built for. So not only do we have Angular on the JavaScript side, but we have Kendo UI for React, jQuery, and Vue as well. And if you're on the .NET side of life, we have things for Blazor, Maui, WPF, and so much more. All of our libraries are themable, customizable, and of course come with killer professional support. So try it out for free today at kendoui.com.